We all like to think of ourselves as pretty rational people, right? That we make logical choices. But what if I told you that when risk gets involved, our decisions are consistently and, well, predictably irrational? Today, we're going to put that idea of the perfectly rational decision maker to the test with a simple little puzzle.
Okay, so here's the choice. I'm giving you two options. Option A is an 80% shot at winning $4,000. Option B, I'll just hand you $3,000, guaranteed, right here, right now. No tricks, I promise. Just take a second. What does your gut tell you to do? Go ahead and lock in your answer.
If you picked B, the sure thing, you are not alone, not by a long shot. In the original study by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, a whopping 80% of people took the guaranteed $3,000. But here's the twist. The most rational choice, if you just do the math, is actually A. Think about it. An 80% chance of 4,000 has what's called an expected value of $3,200. That's $200 more than the sure thing. So what on earth is going on here? Why do most of us instinctively pick the option that's worth less?
To really understand why this is such a head-scratcher, we first need to get a handle on the traditional, classic model of decision-making, the very one our choice seems to completely ignore. For a really long time, the old king of decision theories was something called expected utility theory. And it's a very logical, kind of common sense model. It basically assumes we're all walking around with little calculators in our heads, rationally weighing the odds and outcomes to make the choice that will give us the biggest pile of money in the end. It's simple, it's clean, and it makes a lot of sense on paper. So this theory is built on a few key ideas. It says we weigh value by probability, we make choices based on our final net worth, not just the immediate win or loss, and that generally we prefer a sure thing over a gamble. These are kind of the rules of rational choice. But as we're about to see, we are all serial rule breakers. So yeah, that first puzzle we did, it wasn't a fluke. It was one of the first big cracks to appear in this perfect, shiny model of the rational human. And here is where things get really, really interesting. What happens if we're not choosing between things we could win, but things we could lose? Well, it turns out everything changes. This is something called the reflection effect, and you can see it right here. Look on the left side. In the world of gains, we're risk-averse. We play it safe and take the certain 3,000. But now look what happens when you cross over to the right, into the world of losses. If you're faced with a sure loss of 3,000 versus an 80% chance of losing 4,000, most people gamble. They become risk-seeking all of a sudden, just to avoid a sure loss. Our whole attitude towards risk just completely flips on its head. Okay, let's try another one. Same amounts of money, but this time the probabilities are much lower. Here, a majority of people, 65% of them, actually flip their preference again. They now go for the riskier bet, the 20% shot at 4,000. So when the chance of winning is high, we crave that certainty. But when the chance is low, we suddenly become long-shot gamblers. Now for one last puzzle. And this one really shows a weird quirk in how we think. Imagine a game with two stages. In the first stage, there's a 75% chance you get nothing and the game ends. But there's a 25% chance you get to advance to stage 2. If you make it, you get that familiar choice, a guaranteed 3,000 or an 80% chance at 4,000. Faced with this setup, a massive 78% of people play it safe and take the sure 3,000. But the real question is, why? Because, and here's the kicker, it is the exact same choice as the last slide. A 25% chance to advance times an 80% chance to win 4,000 is a 20% chance overall to win 4,000. A 25% chance to advance to a guaranteed 3,000 is a 25% chance to win 3,000. The math is identical, but how we choose is completely different. This is called the isolation effect. It's like we put on blinders. We just ignore that first shared stage of the game and only focus on the decision right in front of us. All these puzzles and paradoxes show us one thing pretty clearly. Expected utility theory just doesn't cut it. It doesn't describe how we actually behave. So Kahneman and Tversky came up with a new model, prospect theory. And the key is that it doesn't describe how we should choose, but how we do choose. The big difference is we think in terms of gains and losses from some starting point, not our final wealth. And we don't use raw probabilities. We use these subjective decision weights. Prospect theory says our whole choice process happens in two phases. First, there's an editing phase, where our brain just simplifies the problem. This is where that isolation effect happens. We mentally cancel out stuff that's common to both options. Then, after we've simplified it, comes the evaluation phase, where we weigh these now edited options and make our final pick.
So let's dive into that evaluation phase, because this is where the magic happens. We're going to look at the two core ideas that drive all of our choices: how we feel about gains and losses, and how we feel about probability. At the very heart of prospect theory is this incredibly powerful and honestly very intuitive idea: losses loom larger than gains. Just think about it in your own life. The pain you feel from losing a $100 bill is so much more intense than the joy you feel from finding one. This simple emotional truth is the key that unlocks everything. And this whole idea is captured perfectly in what's called the value function, this famous S-shaped curve. There are three key things to notice. 1, everything is judged from that center reference point. It's all about gains and losses from where you stand right now. 2, the curve gets flatter as you move away from the center. That's diminishing sensitivity. But the most important part, the real showstopper, is number 3, loss aversion. Just look at how much steeper the curve is for losses than it is for gains. That picture right there is why we hate losing so much. Okay, so that's how we feel about the outcomes. But that's only half the story. The other absolutely crucial piece of the puzzle, prospect theory's second great insight, is that our brains don't treat probability like a math textbook. We systematically mess up the odds. And we do it in very predictable ways. We totally overweight small probabilities, which is why we all buy lottery tickets. That tiny chance just feels bigger than it really is. And we underweight large probabilities. A 99% chance just doesn't feel like a sure thing, which is why that 100% certain option in our first puzzle was so irresistible. The psychological leaps from impossible to possible and from probable to certain, they feel absolutely massive in our minds. So this is a really fascinating theory about how our brains work, for sure. But its real power, the reason it's so important, is how it explains our actual behavior out in the real world. You know, it's hard to overstate how big of a deal this was. When this paper came out in 1979, it sent absolute shockwaves through economics, psychology, you name it. It was a brand new lens to understand why we do the things we do. It even ended up winning its creators a Nobel Prize. And suddenly, so many everyday behaviors just make perfect sense. Why we buy lottery tickets? That's overweighting a tiny chance of a huge gain. Why we buy insurance? Same thing, but for a huge loss. That panic you see when the stock market dips and everyone sells? That is loss aversion in its purest form. And marketing? Oh, marketers live and breathe this stuff. A $5 discount feels better than a $5 bonus because a discount is framed as avoiding a loss, and we know which one our brain cares about more. Which really brings us to a final and pretty crucial question. If we know that our choices can be completely flipped based on how they're framed as a gain or a loss relative to some reference point, then you have to ask yourself, who's setting your reference point? Is it an advertiser? Is it your boss? Is it just your own expectations? Understanding that and maybe even choosing your own reference point, well, that might just be the most rational choice of all.